In the first video, we explored how Mike Moraski composed the title theme to Portal 2 in a way that reflects the character of the game's central antagonist. In this video, we will examine the scoring for the game's middle section, showing how it employs the structure of theme and variations, and, significantly, how this musical principle also sheds light on the game's organizational approach to level design. The New Grove Dictionary of Music and Musicians defines theme and variation as a form founded on repetition, and as such an outgrowth of a fundamental musical and rhetorical principle in which a discrete theme is repeated several or many times with various modifications. In the classic, that is to say 18th century, theme and variations, many musical parameters remain fixed, including key center, phrase structure, and harmonic progression, while variation comes in the form of increasingly complicated melodic ornamentations. In the early 20th century, composer Arnold Schoenberg somewhat loosened this strict definition, positing what he called developing variations. He meant that a piece could be constructed through deliberate and ongoing modifications of a basic musical shape. 9999999, which we analyzed in the first video, is the compositional generator for two pieces that accompany Portal 2's middle section, in which the player learns a new gameplay technique. You Are Not Part of the Control Group often accompanies these training sequences, held in enormous spherical testing chambers, and Music of the Spheres often plays as Chell moves from chamber to chamber. Music of the Spheres borrows the erratic arpeggios and string descant from 9999999 and adds a new 7-chord progression built predominantly on augmented triads. Much as the random subdivisions in 9999999 subvert the composition's ostensibly rational and algorithmic origins, in Music of the Spheres, the asymmetrical metrical structure and chord content promote a similarly unpredictable and unsettling effect. This reduction, which includes only the harp and synthesized bass and omits the repetition of each chord, reveals some dualities to add to those seen in 9999999. The sonorities in measures 3 and 4 fuse minor and augmented triads. Measure 4 actually features a transposition of the vertigo chord. And in measure 3, a single pitch class appears with 2 rolls. When spelled as an A sharp, the note is participating as a chord member in the ongoing arpeggio gesture. But when spelled as a B flat, the note is participating in an ornamental upper neighbor gesture, repeated and confirmed less ambiguously in measures 4 and 7. The accompanimental music within the testing chambers, You Are Not Part of the Control Group, then develops Music of the Spheres. First, the bass note of each augmented triad in spheres becomes the root of a major triad and control group, except for the first, which is the invertigo chord. And second, each major triad is preceded by a secondary chord, that is, a chord that has an expected dominant to tonic resolution to the one that follows. The changes that transform 999999 into Music of the Spheres, and then into You Are Not Part of the Control Group, suggest that we group the pieces together into something like a set of developing variations. In addition, though, the game features a much more classical set of variations on Music of the Spheres and You Are Not Part of the Control Group, accompanying what might be thought of as a gameplay theme with variations. In the developer commentary for the first Portal, designer Robin Walker describes Valve's pedagogical philosophy of puzzle design.
Portal is effectively an extended player training exercise. We spend a huge portion of the game introducing a series of gameplay tools, then layering those tools into increasingly difficult puzzles.
The same philosophy drives puzzle design in Portal 2 as well. You Are Not Part of the Control Group accompanies the initial introduction of a new gameplay mechanic, the manipulation of gels that change the property of any surfaces that they cover. Chell springboards off of the blue repulsion gel, sprints over the orange propulsion gel, and may place portals on any surface coated with the white conversion gel. Portal 2 treats the gel mechanic as a discrete theme, which is subject to variation, development, and complication over the course of the game. Music of the Spheres first plays as Chell enters the base of an enormous cavern in which the gel chambers are suspended. Throughout this section of the game, Chell ascends to the top of the cavern by moving from sphere to sphere. The player first hears You Are Not Part of the Control Group in the lowest sphere, during the initial introduction to the blue repulsion gel. In this room, the player learns that the height of Chell's bounce is directly related to her momentum. Notice that the designers reinforce the lesson by requiring Chell to retrace her steps to retrieve the box that will weigh down the door switch.
The lab boys just informed me that I should not have mentioned the control group. They're telling me
You Are Not Part of the Control Group returns in the second repulsion gel chamber, now varied so that the arpeggios run in double time. As the music undergoes development, so too do the repulsion gel puzzles. Here, the player learns that Chell may springboard directly off any blue floors. A skill reinforced in the second part of the room after the player also learns that Chell can use the blue gel to bounce off of walls. The room also requires the player to specifically place exit portals at greater and greater heights, so that, like in the previous room, the same gel patch Chell initially used as a springboard ends up propelling her to the highest reaches of the room.
Oh, in case you got covered in that repulsion gel.
In the third repulsion gel chamber, the player learns to redirect a gel source to change the property of ordinary surfaces.
I like your style. You make up your own rules, just like me. Bean counter said I couldn't fire a man just for being in a wheelchair. Did it anyway. Ramps are expensive.
At the same time, the chamber continues to reinforce lessons from the previous two rooms. To solve the puzzle, Chell must springboard directly off of blue surfaces and use momentum to bounce higher and further. This new gameplay variation is accompanied by a new control group variation that adds synthesized percussion.
Just a heads up, that coffee we gave you earlier had fluorescent.
After completing two additional musically unaccompanied chambers, which feature even more complicated repulsion gel puzzles, Chell travels to a new section of the facility, accompanied by Music of the Spheres. Here, she's trained in the use of the orange propulsion gels, which allow her to sprint along any surfaces that they cover. In this first chamber, notice that the designers reinforced the technique by requiring Chell to sprint along the same strip 4 distinct times for 4 distinct purposes in order to solve the puzzle. They also require the player to redirect the flow of the gel using portals, as introduced in the third repulsion gel chamber. Note 2, the return of You Are Not Part of the Control Group, featuring the slow 8th note arpeggios from its first iteration, the synthesized percussion from its third iteration, and a new orchestration featuring a distorted sawtooth lead synth. Now that the player has been trained in manipulating the propulsion gel, the solution to the next chamber requires the player to manipulate both blue and orange gels, bringing the two themes together in a kind of gameplay counterpoint. The musical accompaniment to this puzzle varies You Are Not Part of the Control Group once again, presenting the sawtooth synth arpeggios in 16th notes, with the same double time effect that occurred in the second repulsion gel chamber.
Great job, astronaut, war hero, and/or Olympian. With your help, we're gonna take the world.
After one additional unaccompanied puzzle that further challenges the player in the manipulation of both the blue and orange gels, Chell travels to a third set of chambers that introduce the white conversion gel. On her way, the musical accompaniment reprises Music of the Spheres, but in a variation that features the intensified orchestration and double time arpeggios introduced through the iterations of You Are Not Part of the Control Group. Once there, the game trains the player to use the conversion gel through the same iterative processes we have already seen. The player learns to redirect the flow of the white gel to paint surfaces so that portals may be placed on them, allowing Chell to access previously unreachable areas. Then, once the player has mastered using the white gel by itself, the subsequent puzzles require manipulating all 3 kinds of gels to solve. In short, the gel sequences are organized around 2 kinds of theme with variation, one musical and one involving game design, and this table lays out the joint formal organization of these structures. The game's middle section is framed by the variation of 9999999 in Music of the Spheres, and the chambers feature variations of spheres and You Are Not Part of the Control Group. Each test features a more complicated gameplay variation of the one that preceded it, and so too does the orchestration and pulse thicken with each iteration. These videos have introduced some of the many kinds of rich interactions that are possible when music accompanies storytelling. Often, a careful composer will produce a score that augments a narrative, as Moraski's choices of harmony, texture, instrumentation, rhythm, and meter help portray the contradictions in GlaDOS's character. But whereas for centuries, music has helped tell stories, think opera, songs, and film scores, the young medium of the video game opens up new avenues of compositional strategy, such as Moraski's set of variations on Music of the Spheres and You Are Not Part of the Control Group, which, in addition to augmenting the game's story, also comments on its gameplay, that interactive element so crucial in distinguishing video games from their multimedia forebears.